welcome back to the channel. I thought this was really interesting. I ran my DA across this just to take the shine off of it and see what kind of shape that paint is in. And it was pretty smooth. And then I grabbed a sanding block and I put 40 grit on it, put a really heavy grit just to try something out. The topic has come up recently online about a DA sanding versus a sanding block. And you can hold a DA against the panel flat and go back and forth and get a good flat surface. And you can use a sanding block and do the same thing, but as you can see, you get a totally different result. I had a couple of high spots that showed up with the DA. Look how lumpy this is. Filling across it, it felt good. Going back and forth across it with a DA with 180 grit sandpaper, showed a couple of high spots. Didn't show any of these low spots. But it just goes to show, when I take a sanding block and go over the same area, look at the drastic highs and lows all over on this panel. Now, if I was going to paint this yellow again, you probably wouldn't notice. The DA would probably leave it smooth enough, and the contours here, the reflections of the light, you probably wouldn't notice. Well, I'm going to go high gloss black. And a high gloss black is going to show all the imperfections. It's going to be so wavy. So yeah, this is probably one of the most drastic differences I've seen when it comes to block sanding versus a DA sanding. It's really not that much more work, in my opinion, to use the sanding block. Plus, when I use a sanding block with really heavy grit like this, it'll tell me what kind of condition the paint is in too. Because if the paint comes off pretty easy like this, then it probably should go all the way to bare metal. As I'm sanding on this area, this paint is really solid. It's hard to really break through it. It's a really good finish. So, with that in mind, I don't see any need for me to completely cover this area with a skim coat of filler like I've done on the rest of the car. The rest of the car had a lot of highs and lows that it was showing up. The way this is turning out, if I just sand this now with 180 to loosen up and flatten out some of these deep scratches, and then coat this with high build primer, I'm not going to need much filler on this back panel at all. There's a few high and low spots right here that I can't get to from the back side because there's a bracket here and it's spot welded. So that's what's caused these highs and lows. And there's a few dings on each side where it's been bumped. So skim coat on both ends, skim coat around this area, and then obviously all on top. I don't see the need to take all this paint off. Up here, yeah, I'm not real pleased with how this paint is bonded. But down here, I'm happy with this, just leaving this paint on. Epoxy coat it and high build prime it and block sand it down. So as I'm working along this edge, trying to sand up over it, this rope material just keeps flaking and flaking and flaking. And I could mask it, but my masking tape's not going to stick to it very well. And this is going to flake off in the paint job. So as much as I hate to do it, I need to take this off. I don't know if this is available to replace it, but it's in really good shape other than it's just gotten really dry and flaky and brittle. So I'm hoping there's something I can soak this in. I'll have to do a little bit of research, but if I can take this off, soak it, let it really absorb into it and seal it up, then just put it back on after I've painted. But for now, it looks like it's pretty easy to just bend these pieces up, and it doesn't feel like, no, it's not glued on the back side, or at least why it's not anymore if it was glued at one time. But as I'm pulling it away, I'm seeing it's flaky rust behind there, so it really needs to be treated. Hopefully, my fingers crossed, that it's not rusted through anywhere in there. We'll get this off and see what it looks like. The fingers are still strong. I was worried about bending one up and breaking it off, but fortunately it's just got some really light surface rust on the back side. Ooh, that one's soft. I spoke too early, I jinxed myself. Good. It's solid. It's flaky, but it's solid. So, now that I've got it exposed and it's rusty, I don't have a sandblaster. Sandblaster would be by far the easiest to just blast out that crevice. How do we get rid of that surface rust? Wire wheel in there. Yeah. And want to straighten these out upwards. It looks like they're solid enough that I'd be able to bend them up and then bend them back down. Gel. There's some really cool gel products. I think I've got one. Rust Dissolver Jelly. Naval Jelly. That's probably going to be a good one to attempt on here. Before I start doing any body work or anything, I think I'll read the directions and put some gel in here and see what happens. Start by taking a wire brush. Yeah, I'm very fortunate. Should be able to just wire it and try out this gel. So I've been looking at all these holes that were drilled for the snaps for the convertible top sides and for probably the boot that covered up the convertible top, and they're all over the place. They're not evenly spaced. Some are low, some are high. That kind of stuff drives me crazy. So I'm going to weld over all these holes. Alright, well, according to the instructions, you brush it on. I have a foam brush. I don't have a regular brush. I hope this holds up. If it doesn't, then I'll have to come up with another plan. We'll start with this and see how it works. Our gloves, our eye protection. And let's see how this stuff works out. What's really cool is it says it works within 5 to 10 minutes. That's awesome. I thought I'd have to leave it soaking for who knows how long, but not just 10 minutes. That's pretty cool. Interesting. Pink jelly. So this is interesting. Supposedly soaks into the deep pits after 10 minutes. You rinse it off with water, and if it didn't completely do the job, then you put it back on again. Rinse and repeat. Well, it's been about 15 minutes. I'm going to rinse and see what happens. Looks really good. Don't see any reason to do another coat. What I'll do is I'll just seal that up. I'll show you what I have. I like to use this rust neutralizer. And then once this is cured, then just sand it and prime over it. What that'll do is it turns it black. I think I'll do 2 coats. I'll let this set for a minute. Well, I got 2 coats on this, and it is cured overnight now. And it looks really good. I'm very pleased. I'll just use the Scotch-Brite to scuff it up. Nothing is flaking. I'm not getting down to seeing brown. It's staying black. So this is great. All my finger tabs are really strong. There was one that just the tip broke off of, which was kind of weird. So with this done, now I can move forward on getting the rest of this finished, and then I'll be able to prime all of this. And while I have this off, once I get it primed, I'd like to be able to put this tack strip back in. And I posted some comments online asking if anybody knew where to get this tack strip. Crickets. And so I also posted, since this is in pretty good shape, it's just really dry and it's really flaky. Would anybody have any ideas of how to bond all this back together that's flaking off and make it usable again so I could restore it? Got a couple of ideas, but everything that I've heard will just make this too brittle, too hard of a finish. So when you drive a nail into it, it's just going to crack and fracture, and you're going to have the dryness underneath. So yeah, I want to bond all this outer together and hold it all together, but I want to be able to steel drive staples through it. And I think I've got a way of doing that. So I will do an update on that tack strip in a future video, in case anybody's interested in that. And I'll also be restoring the actual full convertible top frame. So I will put all that together in that video, but I'm months away from being able to get to doing the top convertible rack. So doing that tack strip, tying it all into the convertible top, that'd be a great time for doing that. Be patient on my fix for that tack strip, and in the meantime I'm going to keep looking for a replacement for that too, just in case there is a really good replacement. But for now I want to seal it up so that it doesn't flake off and keep breaking while I have it here. I actually found it. It's on modeltford.com. It's a 3/4 by 3/4 tack strip. It comes in an 8.5 foot long piece. You can heat it up to bend it, and then you can sand it to a radius. All right, so back to this. I will get it all scuffed with a Scotch-Brite pad, and then I need to do some more filler work in just a few areas. I'm not going to coat this whole thing. I'm going to coat all across here, but there's no reason for me to put a lot of expensive filler on this area when just a heavy build primer is going to take care of it. It's interesting though, as I'm sanding this section, the paint failed. So I don't know if it was out in the sun, who knows, but I had to sand all this area down to bare metal, where the rest of this, excellent finish, and then across here I ended up doing most of it down to bare metal. So it just goes to show, when paint is this old, you can have areas that are still okay to leave on and paint over, but there are other areas that has to be stripped to bare metal. So with this now all sanded and prepped and ready, I need to clean it. I want to make sure it's all degreased. It's not likely, but just in case, I don't want anything that is going to not allow the primers or the fillers to bond. So there's several things that I like to use and what I've used in the past that works. Some things work better than others. When it comes to cleaning, if you use this full strength, it's a water-based, and I definitely want to use something water-based when if I'm putting filler directly on the metal. I don't want any chemical residues. I don't want to use anything like a paint prep that is solvent-based. I want it to be water-based. So this works great, but I've actually found a couple of things that work better, that is stronger. This is pretty strong, but recently I've been using KBS. I've used this on several projects now. Basically, I wanted to be able to strip all the grime off of a frame for a Pontiac that I did, and I needed something stronger. The green stuff just wasn't getting it off. It was taking forever. I'd heard about this KBS Clean, so I used it, and it works pretty good. It takes a while. I mean, you have to let it soak. You have to keep it damp for a frame, a really grimy frame, probably an hour. And then you have to agitate it a lot. Wire brushes, Scotch-Brite pads. But it did work. It worked fantastic. And according to what I can find out on the pH scale, I'm no scientist, and I'm no chemist, but when it comes to the pH, this is on the high end of the pH scale. And it's about 10 times stronger than the green stuff. So this works really good. But it's kind of expensive. For a quart like this, you're around $14. And I couldn't find anybody that I could buy it from locally, so I had to have it shipped, so then you're tacking on shipping. So it was about 20 bucks. I found something, they actually found me. They reached out to me and said, would you try our product? And what's great is that you can find it just about any hardware store. Super clean. pH scale-wise, it's the same as the KBS Clean, and this was about $6-7 bucks. So I was really pleased to try it out, and it's wonderful. I used the same methods as I did with the KBS Clean. Put it on, keep it wet, and agitate it, and it cuts the grime off. And it's water-based, so it's great to be able to just spray this on to prep, let it soak, and I cleaned this with the damp rag, and you can just see dirt is running. So the damp rag got all the loose light stuff off, but this is getting deep and really cleaning well. So, you know, it's just a matter of, I want to wipe off the heavy residue, and then I need to get it wet so that the water will neutralize the high pH. If you're going to be using this direct on your skin and you're really going to get your hand wet, you want to use gloves. With what I'm doing, I'm not really getting myself wet. Now we want to neutralize it and rinse it off with water. Now, another thing I've learned over the years, when it comes to cleaning, what towels you use, make sure you got good clean towels. That seems like a given, but also the colors that you use. I've used blue towels, and for some reason the blue towels have like a silicone in the coloring or something. I don't know, but I get really bad fish eyes every time I use a blue towel. Go figure. I don't know what it is. I wash the towels all the same, but fish eyes really bad with blue. So just avoid blue. So it just goes without saying, this is a very important step, getting it all clean. Now, because I use water-based cleaner and a water to rinse it all off, I'm going to start flash rusting. So the remedy for that is the phosphoric acid that I'm going to use to clean this metal and give me that next step that is so important when it comes to putting body filler direct to metal. I use the KBS Blast. I started using this when I started using the KBS products, the KBS Clean, the KBS Blast, and then the KBS Rust Seal for frames and underbodies. It just really works great. There's a lot of people, Pour 15, the KBS sealers, and a lot of people say they don't like it. It doesn't bond very well, it flakes off. Well, it's all in the process. If you go through all the steps and you do it the way that instructions say to do it, I have never had any problems with Pour 15 or KBS sealers. They work fantastic. I really enjoy using them. And I also like to use this when it comes to sealing off and prepping the metal for using fillers and primers. And it's water-based again. You don't want to use any chemicals. You don't want a chemical residue before you do your primers and your fillers. So with this, same process, mist it on with the sprayer, let it set, and it actually leaves a coating behind. It leaves like kind of a whitish, bluish haze. So use it full strength. Use your protective gear. This stuff is on the opposite end of the pH spectrum. This is around a 1, I believe. This is very acidic. This is the acid end, where the other products are on the alkalinity, I think is what it is. But I'm getting a little bit of a rust haze from the moisture. This will get rid of it. I just want to mist it on. And I like to work it in. And that flash rust is gone. So right away I see this is going bluish already. And then if I just let it dry on here, full strength, it's too much. You've got to rinse it off. So I want to let this sit and stay damp, kind of work it around, and if it dries up, give it another coat to loosen up that surface again. And then once it starts to get to that point where it's dry, again, you don't want to let it dry, it's just drying and getting thinner and thinner, then you'll want to rinse it off. It's been probably about 5 minutes now, and I think this has done the job where I am comfortable with. So now I will rinse it off. Now I have that really nice haze to it. It's just this bluish zinc haze that it should have. So while this is setting up, let's talk about primer and filler. There's a lot of comment and discussion and argument over primer first, filler first, epoxy primers, high build primers, combination primers. In my opinion, depending on where you are and how you're going to be doing your project and what time frame, what's the humidity, epoxy primer directly on the metal, directly on an area like this, whether it be paint or just bare metal, that's probably the best first step. Get it sealed up so that you're not going to flash rust while you're waiting to get to work on your project, or you're working on this end and that end has got bare metal and it's rusting on you. Well, in my area, I'm in the high desert, it's just not an issue. I've had bare metal on like this fender. That fender's been bare metal for 6 months or more. I just don't get flash rust. So I like to put my filler direct to metal and then coat everything. When I get all my filler roughed in, then go to epoxy. And the reason why I do that is because filler is porous. Filler is like a sponge when it comes to the moisture. It'll absorb it and it'll hold it. If I do an epoxy primer on everything first, and then I put my filler on top of that primer, of course after I've got a good scratch in the primer so that it bonds, that sponge can absorb that moisture and hold it. So that when I put on my high build primer, I can lock in that moisture. And yes, the high build primers, most of them, depending on the primer that you're using, is porous as well. So it can let that moisture air off. But if it doesn't get aired off and it gets sealed into the paint, it can etch in the rust. Now, yeah, if you're putting this on top of the epoxy, then it's not likely going to let the moisture get to the bare metal, and that bare metal is going to be sealed well. So, yeah, it's kind of this balancing act. I like to put my filler on and then epoxy on top of all the filler so that I've sealed the metal, I've sealed the filler, and then I can put my high build on top of the epoxy, direct on top of the epoxy. I don't have to wait and sand it. If I put all my epoxy on first, then I've got to sand it. Well, I definitely want to sand it for the filler because I want a deep scratch. But any areas that I didn't put filler on, I've got to sand to get it prepped for primers, for high build primers, for the paint. So in my mind, I'm eliminating that step. I go filler, I go my epoxy primer, I go direct to my high build primer, and I don't have to ever sand that epoxy. And the epoxy, it could take several days to cure enough to where you can sand it without it plugging up your sandpaper. So for me, that's what really works best. Filler direct to metal, epoxy, and then high build right after, all at the same day. But because I'm not in a humid climate, I can have this filler on direct metal and not have to worry about it absorbing any moisture because we just don't have any. I have a very low humidity area. So it really depends on several things. If you're in a high humidity area, I would recommend get that epoxy on just as soon as you can. Cover up that bare metal. All right, well, this is all prepped now. It is all clean. I've got my acid base, so I am ready to start applying filler to this area now. And like I said, I'm going to just do some touch-up type filler. I'm going to coat all of this because it's so wavy. I've got a patch here I need filler, I've got a patch here I need filler, and I've got these corners. And then I don't have to waste, it's not really waste, but in a way, there's no reason for me to put more filler on all the rest of this area. So while this is drying up all this moisture and all these acids and everything that's on here, plus I need to clean up a little bit, we'll call it good on this video. All right, well, I hope you find this informative. I hope it helps you. Well, thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.